Greetings and thanks for joining today's webinar from Real Story Group. I am Scott Dill, the Director of Business Development, and with me is our founder and CEO, Tony Byrne. We are really excited for today's presentation. We're going to talk about Salesforce and how it relates to the future of your MarTech stack. For those of you that were with us, we had a similar presentation a few weeks ago about Adobe. You'll find that today's session will be just as enlightening and hard-hitting as that one was. And if you haven't seen that one yet, you're actually welcome to download it on our website, and we can send you the coordinates to that a little bit later on. We expect that today's presentation will certainly strike a chord with you. So if you have any feedback or questions that you'd like to share throughout today's session, you can do so in the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. And then the slides from today's session will be sent to you from our marketing team within the next couple of days. So you can keep an eye out for those and share those with your colleagues if you'd like. To get started, really we want to talk a little bit about the history of Real Story Group. We've been at this now for 24 years, and we have never wavered from this business model of never working for the vendors that we cover in any way, shape, or form. So we don't speak at their conferences or write white papers for them. We firmly sit on the buyer side of the table as you're making important technology choices, especially when it pertains to your MarTech stack. And so we really pull no punches when describing the good, bad, and ugly of what these vendors do well, but also, maybe more importantly, where they might fall short for you. And that'll ring true during today's session about Salesforce. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tony to walk you through it. Tony?
Great, thanks, Scott. Love this topic. We have to start by kind of framing it that, of course, Salesforce is one of close to 150 different vendors that we evaluate. This is our subway map, which shows all the different vendors that Real Story Group evaluates across about 10 different streams. Each stream represents a different line on this subway or tube map. And you can see Salesforce being right in the city center, which means that they sell into almost all of these marketplaces at one point or another. And this is going to come up here shortly when we talk about, what they're good at and what they're not. But this is one way of looking at the stack, kind of a flat way of looking at it from a marketplace perspective. We'll take a look at more of what your stack looks like in a minute. But before we go there, I wanted to share, there's a kind of an enigma about SharePoint, and I've been kind of in the back of our minds for the last 5 years, and it's really been more front of mind in the last 2 years, which is, it has a significant footprint across MarTech stacks. Many of the large enterprises we work with, I would say most, license at least one Salesforce product somewhere. But the enigma is about this firm is that increasingly, it seems like very few of their licensees actually like working with them. They're very frustrated with Salesforce. Now, of course, there's frustration across many MarTech providers, but Salesforce seems like it's kind of becoming like the new Oracle. It's sort of like, well, we sort of have to use them, but we don't really like working with them. And I think it's worth thinking about and investigating why this phenomenon is happening. And I'm going to get into that a little bit because I think it also has some implications about the future of your stack. So with that, let's kick it off. We're going to start with what is the future, likely future of your MarTech stack, particularly if you're a large enterprise. What is then Salesforce strategy? How does that strategy play out in their platforms? And then what should you do about it? So let's just jump right into it. Many of you who follow Real Story Group have seen this reference architecture. We think this is the challenge of the 2020s, which is, yes, you've got a lot of engagement channels at the top. You've got multiple different interaction delivery environments you have to care for. And then you have a set of key engagement services. And many of us have spent a good part of the last 20 years kind of bulking up our capabilities across customer care, loyalty, social media, outbound marketing, web content management, e-commerce, et cetera, that first colored row. This is the B2C model. You'll see in a minute the B2B model is a little bit different. The key innovation of what we think is happening in the 2020s, and which we're encouraging our clients to be intentional about, is this whole notion of enterprise foundation services. That is, in the 3 columns here, or legs of the stool, content and information on the left, data in the middle, and decisioning services on the right, that these are capabilities that in the future we all need to have in a more decoupled way from our engagement services. In other words, that these are kind of enterprise MarTech foundation services that allow you to then plug and play different capabilities above it, but your foundation is set in order to serve your customer in an increasingly complicated digital channel. And so the way we describe this is loosely coupled or even formally decoupled, but strongly backed. So here we have some pluggable engagement services. In this case, it's B2B firm. And we think that there's, three things you want to do. You want to scale, you want to get to omni-channel, and you want to be adaptive going forward. And the only way to do that is to have this sort of an architecture where a lot of the complexity and resources and budget increasingly are going to go to these cross-channel, or I would say channel agnostic sort of services. The only way to scale, the only way to get to omni-channel. We sometimes call this a legless architecture. And the reason why I introduce this is because Salesforce is only kind of belatedly coming around to this. And what's more, their strategy is kind of antithetical to this. So there's a bit of a collision here for those of you who have really committed heavily to Salesforce in terms of where they're going, and this kind of stack model, which we think is where you need to be going, particularly if you're a larger enterprise as the decade ensues. But the other thing, while we're talking about the 2020s, is that there's a particular stack model that has won out. And that is what we call, and other people call, the composable stack model. So we took a look at our 30 largest subscribers and clients for Real Story Group. These are primarily global enterprises, or if they're not global, they're extremely large enterprises, complicated, multiple products, channels, so forth. What are they using? And you see all these different logos here. The jury is out, right? Or I say the jury has come back in. That the composable, we all have composable stacks, almost all of us. I can think of only one large enterprise that has gone all in. They went all in with Adobe, and even then they had to really supplement it. So yes, you can see the Salesforce logo scattered around here, but Salesforce itself alone, as much as they would like to or say that they can't really satisfy your full stack sort of needs. The composable stack has won. So that's an important backgrounder as we approach any discussion of any large MarTech vendor, but Salesforce in particular. All right, so let's talk about what we think Salesforce is doing. So of course, this may be different than what Salesforce says that they're doing, but if we start on the left, they do have a product modernization strategy, and that modernization strategy is unfortunately less about modernizing a lot of their kind of legacy or acquired platforms and more about trying to bind those individual solutions to their data layer and their AI services. And what they describe this is as a unified platform. So Salesforce will talk all the time, and you can see it in the graphic on the lower, that there is such a thing as a Salesforce platform. So the idea there is, what's implied but not said explicitly is that, look, the Salesforce platform means you don't have to have a composable stack. You just go with Salesforce and almost everything is taken care of. Of course, we can see in the previous slide that's not the case, not now nor realistic in the future. But the other thing that's really important is that there actually isn't really a Salesforce platform. They say there is, but a Salesforce platform kind of doesn't exist. It is the new name for the former Force.com platform, which is mostly around building modules around Sales Cloud. It predates the public web. So there's issues with Force.com we'll get into with that kind of past solution. But when you look at what Salesforce is looking to do, and by the way, this isn't really all that much different from Adobe and for that matter, Oracle, is they really want to try to own as much of your stack as possible and bind you to use their AI modules to kind of bind it all together for you. This is really an anti-composability strategy. They have little incentive to play nicely with non-Salesforce platforms, and we hear this repeatedly from our licensees. But one of the issues is that there's even all kinds of challenges integrating among the Salesforce platforms themselves. The other thing that you have to remember about Salesforce is they have very aggressive escalation strategies. So if you as a licensee are pushing back, they are likely to go to your C-suite, to your board and say, look, we have this Salesforce platform. Your employees are making short-sighted tactical decisions. You should just align with us and we'll take you to this new era of digital transformation and AI. So they're really kind of pushing an all-in strategy. Again, very similar to Adobe. And again, something that we believe is not at all in your interests with respect to your own stack modernization. So let's look at what Salesforce talks about with respect to a platform. So they argue that this whole as an integrated solution is greater than the sum of the parts. But if we look at some of the key dimensions of Salesforce Marketing Cloud, which you look in the lower left there, there's actually among those 5 logos, there's at least 8 different platforms, and none of them run completely, by the way, on Force.com. They were almost all acquired and run on a potpourri of different public clouds and private clouds and that sort of thing. So you have Salesforce Marketing Cloud Personalization. This was the exact target solution. Actually is more focused on behavioral personalization, has some pretty good performance, but a number of other issues. Salesforce doesn't really quite figure out what they want to do with it. Then there's Salesforce kind of core marketing cloud. So this is the exact target acquisition. So this is Email Studio, Journey Builder, Automation Studio, a bunch of other tools, primarily around outbound marketing, but then they also throw in their advertising cloud and the loyalty cloud, both of which they acquired. Salesforce Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, that's the new fancy name for Pardot. Pardot is kind of like the crazy uncle that they're keeping in the attic, and mostly they kind of want him to stay there. Salesforce Data Cloud is a fancy name for their CDP and a bunch of very legacy kind of data services around it. This is something they tried to build themselves, has not gone particularly well. And then Marketing Cloud Intelligence, depending on who you talk to, is the kind of legacy Datorama product, along with maybe some Tableau stuff. Now, what Salesforce then wants to do is sell you a MuleSoft license. They acquired MuleSoft to kind of put all these different pieces together. They all run on different technology stacks. They all have fairly different interfaces, different performance issues, different licensing models, so on and so forth. So the advantage to that is you can actually buy them a la carte, and you can make it part potentially of your composable stack. So this is when we look at what savvy enterprises are doing, when we get over on the right here in terms of enterprise responses, is that savvy enterprises remain focused on specific areas of value in Salesforce. If Marketing Cloud is working great for you, hey, go for it. If Pardot Cloud is still working great, hey, no reason to leave. It's a more tactical sort of approach. If, however, you have their flagship, so let's be clear that Salesforce flagship platform is Sales Cloud, right? That's really the center of their universe. That's what really is the backbone that built up the whole Force.com platform. If you have Sales Cloud and it's working well for you, great. But you should be cautious about transitioning then and also then lighting up Marketing Cloud. First of all, you'll find they're not particularly well integrated. And secondly, Marketing Cloud is a whole different technology stack. Now, the Salesforce CDP is gaining some attention, but when we see it implemented, typically it's because somebody imposed it rather than it was selected on its own merits. So that means you ought to be very careful there. Whenever you're working with Salesforce, you want to, of course, be aware of technical debt and pricing. And the way you do that is by consistently having competitive reviews and make sure that you've got the right fit at the right price. Salesforce Marketing Cloud, the outbound campaign, it's getting older. It has aged better than some old email marketing platforms, so we'll give it that. But it's aged kind of unevenly, and we are seeing some exit planning there. Doesn't mean you have to rush for the exits, but we know that some of your peers are considering that. So if we look at the future of the Salesforce platform, really they're betting hard that AI and agentic tooling will prove a differentiator. Now, Salesforce has certainly put a lot of energy into talking about this. The actual execution has been a little bit uneven. These all, of course, cost extra. And in a composable stack, I think you'll have to wonder, do I really want my agent technology, or for that matter, any of my AI services coming from just one vendor in that stack? Is this really more the tail wagging the dog where I end up licensing other MarTech platforms because I already have the AI, or it shouldn't really be the other way around? So we don't think that that's necessarily going to become a huge differentiator going forward. So now let's look at the platforms themselves, and I'll remind you once again that if you have any questions at all, if there's anything you disagree with, anything you want to agree with, feel free to use the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll definitely have time at the end. All right, let's talk about the Salesforce platforms. So again, I'll use the word platforms. There's not one platform, there are multiple platforms at Salesforce, even on the marketing side, or I should say, especially on the marketing side. Now, the typical analyst firm, but which of course I'm talking about Gartner and Forrester and others, they tend to put Salesforce in the upper right-hand quadrant. Partly this is because Salesforce is very good at analyst relations, and partly they're very good at contracting with these analyst firms, bullying them when they need to. If you look at our Real Story Group's Real Quadrant Generator, you might see a different story. So if you haven't tried our Real Quadrant, you plug in your scenarios and your strategic considerations, and it generates an actual customized quadrant for your specific needs. So I just took our Journey Orchestration Engine quadrant, punched in to say, hey, here are the 3 scenarios I'm interested in: journey listening, offline, online orchestration, service, and support. And you can see that Salesforce here ends up in the loser quadrant. Now, you could also create certain scenarios where Salesforce is in the winner quadrant, but I'm going to argue that more often than not, you may not want Salesforce on your shortlist when you look at it relative to your specific needs, as opposed to some generic assessment of the vendor as a whole. Now, of course, if you go to the Salesforce conference, if you visit their website, if you see all their reams of consultants and integrators, they have all sorts of wonderful case studies. Those case studies are interesting and sometimes useful. But when we've been talking to licensees over the last 5 years, especially, remember my introduction about how there's kind of an enigma around Salesforce. At the one hand, there's a little bit of a kind of a glow around them, and then on the other hand, you know, most of the people at most of the licensees don't have a particularly good impression of Salesforce. And so why is that? When we talk to people, there's really 3 key gotchas that recur constantly. So the first one is just all kinds of roadblocks. One is poor performance and random throttling. This is particularly the case for anything built off the Force.com platform, and all kinds of opaque hiccups, like things just go wrong and nobody can tell you. And then Salesforce says, well, let me bring in a consulting firm and pay them, you know, you can pay them for 3 months and $200,000 and they'll figure out what's going on. I mean, you know, this is just, there's a lot of technical debt here. The other thing that we see with Salesforce is high and escalating costs. So one of the things about it is that even if you just do straight up unit cost comparisons, and we've done this around email marketing and other things, tends to be much higher than their peers. They've got high overhead, again, technical debt, some aging infrastructure, and so they typically tend to be higher priced. There's comparatively higher integration hassles, both integrating within Salesforce and beyond. There's also this kind of business model of what we call like perpetual extraction. So like if you're looking for reports in your platform, they'll say, well, we can sell you that. We've got this external reporting platform, you know, that will do that for you. Just on and on and on. And this idea that every problem can be solved with a new tool is that Salesforce account execs, their mission in life is to get you to spend more every year. And so, okay, that's a model, but whether that's the right MarTech model for you, particularly if you're just spending more to stay even at a base level, it's really questionable ROI there. The other challenge that we've seen from Salesforce, this is very subtle, is that Sales Cloud and the Force.com platform was not really built for consumer grade scale. Now, that's one of the reasons why the various SKUs in the Marketing Cloud are built on other platforms, very often acquired, already running in some other cloud, like Google, Azure, AWS. Because Force.com really doesn't handle consumer scale volumes. It's fine for, you know, hundreds of sales people logging in across multiple, you know, maybe split among different orgs. And so, but even within Marketing Cloud, there are certain platforms, including parts of the former ExactTarget, the outbound marketing, parts of Personalization Cloud that, while powerful, are getting a little long in the tooth and we're seeing more and more sort of performance issues there. We know that the CDP and the other homegrown platforms do also struggle at higher volumes, and the way that Salesforce deals with it is they tend to just apply more throttling and push you to do more sort of batch jobs, have certain processing appear at different times, things like that. So another way of putting this is that, you know, Salesforce may have come from the Oracle tree, but Salesforce itself, they've done a pretty good job, one might say a very good job, of acquiring other companies, but the software they build themselves within the last 10 years or so tends not to be that great, tends not to be all that performant. The other thing about Salesforce that is what drives our clients nuts is that they have an exceptionally high BS factor. So, you know, there's a lot of bullshit in the MarTech world. You know that, I know that. That we have to align the reality of technology with the aspirations, the almost unlimited aspirations of marketers, and that leaves a window for vendors to exaggerate it more. We like to look at this problem from kind of a two-pronged spectrum. So what you see on this spectrum here is a technology capability spectrum, and we often see a couple of gaps there. So there's a gap on the left, which is the capacity gap, and that's what you have the capacity to do to what the vendor software can really do. And often there's a gap there that, particularly with Salesforce, where many of their platforms are powerful, are highly customizable. If you don't have the resources to do that, you can't really exploit that. And that's not necessarily Salesforce's fault, to be sure. But then there's the hyperbole gap, what we sometimes call the bullshit gap, and this is really one of our missions in life is to try to close this gap for you, which is what the vendor software can really do and what the vendor says their software can really do. And I would say that Salesforce exploits this gap as much or more than any other vendor. They'll tell you that their CMS is headless when it's not. They'll tell you that their CDP is real-time when it's not. They'll tell you that Datarama can scale when to certain volumes when really it can't, on and on and on. So, you know, there's always a little bit of exaggeration and hype in any technology marketing. I would say that of all the major MarTech vendors, we would say that Salesforce has the most distant relationship to the truth. So let's just leave it at that. So what can we generalize? So first, there is some potential power in the Salesforce suite. Even the marketing cloud, what they now call kind of the engagement cloud piece, the outbound campaign and marketing. There's potentially a lot of power there, particularly if you have the engineering and data chops to really leverage it. Across the board, Salesforce does maintain a suite of generally highly customizable platforms. So customizable means that if you have enough time, money, and ibuprofen, you can get it to do some pretty specialized stuff. But that then brings us to the next point, which is there tends to be a higher than average developer and resource intensivity, routinely requiring more time and effort to do the basics, and as we mentioned, manifold surprises. And so what happens is, and this is really sad when we see this, is that we see folks sort of spending a lot of time thinking about how to get their Salesforce platform to work instead of how to do better digital marketing. And those are two different things. One should be the means to the end, but sometimes kind of getting Salesforce up and running and doing it the right way becomes kind of an end in itself. So it becomes a bit of a distraction. In general, we conclude that the vendor is a stronger marketer than they are software developer. They've acquired some good platforms, but the stuff they build themselves, they tend to not be able to check they tend to not be able to cash the checks that their product managers issue. So, by the way, Scott mentioned that we did a recent session about Adobe in this respect, and I think we may have said similar things about Adobe. So I think, you know, both of them really kind of come out of the Oracle tree of how to sell software. Neither of them, they're both very effective marketers. Neither of them, though, necessarily have Oracle's traditional kind of software development chops. All right. What should you do about this? First of all, if you haven't already, you want to convert to a tactical relationship with Oracle. Oracle does not want to have a tactical relationship with you, but you want to have a tactical relationship with Oracle. So you only buy what you really need and don't hesitate to downshift out of dead ends, right? If something is going bad, you'll probably know it. Salesforce will know it. At some point, they're going to cut it off or replace it. You know, they've done that certainly with their social studio, with their advertising studio, some other things. You want to get out of the dead end before they do. The other thing is you'll want to push back against the sort of relationship selling that Salesforce will do among your senior leadership, telling them that there's such a thing as a Salesforce platform, that they can align everything around a Salesforce platform, train up some top Salesforce people, and this will take care of all of the pesky difficulties of integrating their MarTech and AdTech and sales tech stacks. And this is, of course, simply not true. It is, however, a very powerful and compelling message. I would say a fair bit of time that we've spent over the past 3 years talking about Salesforce is really helping people who actually know about their MarTech stacks, are experts in their MarTech stacks, enterprise architects, MarTech leaders, marketing op leaders, push back against some of this mythology. One way you can push back is to do number 2, which is competitively test specific products against alternatives. Which solution proved better, more cost effective, and better business fit. Oracle typically wants, Salesforce, that was a slip of the tongue there. Salesforce typically wants you to do a one vendor POC just with them. And usually, you know, that doesn't tell you a whole lot. What you really want to do is particularly at renewal time, do some competitive testing and make Salesforce prove that they're the best solution for you. Of course, you want to continue to make the case for stack composability. It doesn't mean that you won't have some anchor solutions from Oracle, Adobe, or for that matter, Salesforce. But Salesforce's strategy here of imagining this world where there's such a thing as a Salesforce platform that is at the center of your MarTech stack, they're really on the wrong side of MarTech history, and you want to be on the right side of MarTech history. And then once again, definitely apply the same lens to Adobe, right? You don't want to run out of the embrace of Salesforce and then run into the not so gentle embrace of Adobe, where you're going to run into similar issues, although they're going to play out in different ways, and the two companies have different strengths. Everything that I'm recommending here, I would also recommend that you do with Adobe. So I mentioned that Real Story Group has clients and subscribers. There's various ways that we can help you in your MarTech journey. The first is we can help you find the best fit vendor using our hard-hitting research and our tools, our product selection methodology, which we've encapsulated in this wonderful book that I'm happy to share with you if you're interested. Some large enterprises do a full stack subscription, and we help them optimize their stack as a whole. And then the third way that we can help you is with our MarTech Executive Leadership Council. Just had a great meeting about Gen AI last week. We're meeting again in Atlanta in May. Be hosted by a large enterprise that's headquartered in Atlanta, and these are private exclusive meetings only for enterprise MarTech leaders where we share what's working, what's not working. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to get in touch, and Scott can tell you just how to do that while I look at some of the questions that are coming in. And once again, I think we'll have time for a few more questions if you're interested.
Great, thanks, Tony. And as Tony mentioned, you can take a look at a number of our research areas here by downloading samples from our website. You know, Salesforce does touch on a lot of these different technology areas. So take a look and look at some of the samples, and you'll see the hard-hitting ways that we evaluate each of these vendors in these different technology areas. You can also take a look at that Adobe webinar that we mentioned, along with a few others, if you're looking at things like selecting a CDP or looking at the CMS marketplace. So feel free to download some of those. And then you can join us next month when we take a look at 10 mistakes to avoid when selecting MarTech. So that's something that we'll walk through in case you happen to be on the cusp of, or perhaps in the middle of a technology selection project. With that, I do see a number of questions coming in, so I'll turn things back over to Tony.
Great. So Steve is asking, everyone is going to want to get a real-time CDP. I think most organizations are leaning that way, but it may take a while for that to evolve. But in general, Steve, I agree with you conceptually. And then he continues, while Salesforce Data Cloud has both good and bad solutions, can it work effectively with a third-party CDP that is real-time? I'm going to say no. Salesforce doesn't want to work with this. Salesforce Data Cloud has its own embedded CDP really at the core of it, and it doesn't really want to work with a third party. Now, there are many real-time third-party CDPs that will work effectively with Salesforce Marketing Cloud, particularly the outbound email portion of it. And that's fairly standard sort of use case. So the converse is true, but Salesforce doesn't want to work with third parties. Corey is asking, surprised Real Story Group only covers one AI decisioning engine. That's actually not quite true. That's among our client base, the top 30 vendors that we surveyed. Let me go back here real quickly. Pega was the only one that showed up. And what's interesting about that is that decisioning AI is probably the area where we're seeing maybe a little bit of a lag on the MarTech side, but also a lot of it is happening in your data team as opposed to your marketing team. We actually cover multiple AI vendors. That's on the green line here. And we've actually just added to that list recently, and we're putting out a new map. You're going to see about 15, 16 different AI vendors here. So D is asking, will the recording be sent out after the webinar? Yes. How robust is Salesforce account management loyalty platform? So first of all, those are two different platforms. And how robust depends on what you mean and need. So we tend to avoid the word robust because we find that that doesn't really have a lot of meaning. Raja, is that our take on it is what's the right fit. So Pardot, which is the account management piece, the right fit there is for really a very small business that uses Salesforce Sales Cloud. But even then, you probably have better options that integrate with you just as well or better with Salesforce Sales Cloud. You know, the loyalty platform was an acquisition. You would think it would be very tied into Sales Cloud and the rest of Marketing Cloud. It isn't yet. The thing about loyalty solutions, they tend to be very specific to different types of programs. So it really depends on what's the center of gravity of your loyalty platform and then kind of working on from there. Okay, so with that, we've gone 5 minutes over, but grateful for you all sticking around. A lot of folks here. You're always welcome to send us additional questions at the contact information that we shared. But always great to share time with you. And so we'll sign off now. This is Tony Byrne and Scott Dill for Real Story Group saying so long for now.